Okay, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today at RG Podcast, or I should say, joining me. I normally like to have a co-host here with me, but today I'll be flying solo, which is great because as a Christian, I do want to make some of my thoughts known um, concerning the Trump situation, and also I do want to say that if you are an atheist, I mean, if you're someone who's from another religion, probably a lot of this won't be relevant to you because this is mostly aimed at other Christians and it's mostly from the perspective from a Christian because I do have differing views of the situation from as being an American, one, to being someone who doesn't live in America. So I always have to, preface all of this 100% that I'm not someone who lives in America. So some of this stuff doesn't 100% apply to me, but stuff overseas does apply to me, which I will get to in a minute. And so, some of this stuff, though, as a human, some of the stuff just has to interest you. You know, we can sometimes get really caught up in politics and really get caught up in arguments, philosophy, but we always have to take a step back and recognize that these issues affect people and people are affected by them. And that's sometimes in a good way and that's sometimes in a bad way. But to try to live in a world where you're not affected in politics by politics in some way or another is impossible unless you go out and remove yourself like on an island or as some of the survivalists do, they'll move up to the mountains or whatever, but still in some way shape or form you are going to be influenced by politics one way or the other. So as a Christian, I try to have some kind of idea what's going on. That doesn't mean that I'm like obsessively involved with it. I try to make this very well known that I don't contribute to politicians, one side or the other. So I would much, much, much rather use my money and time that I have on a personal level trying to do things to help people out. So the idea that I would donate it to a person who's making a promise who may or may not do what they've said that they're going to do is that is just beyond me. So I don't want to waste my time and get disappointed whether or not a politician said I was going to do this, but then they didn't do it after all. So I know when I get involved with stuff and when I donate money and time somewhere, I like to know where it's going. I'm a bit of a stickler about that sometimes. So I really want to know if I'm giving to a group or an organization, what specifically the money I'm being used for is, to do what. So anyway, that being said, I do have to preface. Okay, so I'll preface a couple of things. One is as a Christian, we got to be very careful about lobbying condemnation and judgment towards people. Now, of course, we can judge individual actions and we're called to be held like accountable to people who are around us. If you see someone who's going wayward or if you see someone who's blinded by something, it's not just a politeness or whatever. It's like a duty as a Christian that we have to be trying to correct people and trying to bring them into the light to not for the sake of condemning or saying we're better than them. I mean, this is like we have to be very, very clear about this as Christians right from the top, because both sides of the aisle can get very judgmental and very condemning of the other side, whatever side they happen to be on. So, I mean, as Christians, we need to say first and foremost, look, I mean, my poop stinks just as much as anyone else. I'm daily a sinner. It is merely by the grace of God that I exist. By the grace of God go I. So people who are condemning of Trump or Camilla or Biden, I mean, you hear a lot of that. You hear a lot of condemnation coming from the other side. And I have to say very explicitly, as a Christian, we're called to do something very, very, very specifically. One, we are called to love people, to spread the gospel, to do acts of kindness and benevolence on this planet. But as far as our leaders go, we're called to pray for them, okay? Because you'll see a lot of people saying that it's your Christian obligation to do this or that. Well, you have a Christian obligation to pray for people. And so when you hear the Republicans talking about, bashing Biden, or it was Obama before, you just ask them a question: Are you praying for this? Are you praying for this leader? And oftentimes, what they'll say, I know this because this has happened dozens of times to me, and I never hear anything other than the response I'm about to say right now, which is, yeah, I pray that God removes them. I pray that God takes them out. God kills them. And so that's funny because I've read the Bible where it says that, and it doesn't talk about praying that for God to destroy the leaders or whatever. It talks about not only praying for the leaders that are in your country, but for the leaders around the world, because it talks very specifically that the leaders around the world have been put into place by God. So I will be the first to admit that I know my calling as a Christian to do this. And I definitely do not always live up to that. I mean, there's plenty of times where I want to be judgmental and condemning. And I would say it's more often than not that I have more of a position that, well, sometimes just pure ambivalence, that just not caring. But although I don't pray against any president at all or any politician, I know that I should be praying a lot more than I actually do. But that being said, it's not as though I don't actually pray for, especially when Trump was in office, because getting back to my history as a Christian, as a new Christian about 10 years ago, this is around the time that the Trumpism really started to take off. And as a Christian, I got to tell you this, as a new Christian, my first knee-jerk response was to be very condemning about Donald Trump. Part of it is because I was Mexican, or I am Mexican. And so the kind of rhetoric that I was hearing, the kind of dehumanizing language that I saw was very disturbing. So there was that. And then the way that I saw people who were getting obsessed with him was very troubling. I have to say, it was very, very, very troubling to see this going down, because these are, family members, friends that I've had my whole life. And it seemed like a lot of people were just completely and utterly blinded to the situation at hand. And so that naturally made me get pretty angry. Part of it was anger at them. Part of it was anger at him. And part of it was anger at the political establishment, just in general. So I have lost, unfortunately, some relationships due to this issue. So this is not like some nefarious thing that I'm just talking out of my mouth. This is legitimate stuff here, and initially I was really drawing in to get into some arguments and debate people. And I started to really realize something, that I'm just more likely to completely alienate this person and really just piss them off than to make any kind of difference. And so I had a few of these arguments, and I'm just like, this is really not worth my time. You only have so many hours in the day to try to do something productive with your time. So it's like, where exactly are you going to spend the hours, the moments of your time? And I was just choosing not to get involved with these arguments online. And then I just, I just had an experience where I just truly understood the depths of my sins and my depravity. And when I really started to grasp that, it really just disarmed me to be able to go after him in such a violent manner that I had done before in the past. And so I really thank God that he changed my heart and my mind on that, because the problem is with Christians is that we tend to look to other people and can completely ignore the same kind of stuff that's going on in our lives. And this is one reason why, a lot of people don't like Christians. They'll say, don't do one thing, and then they'll turn around and do the same thing. Or I heard a pastor say it so eloquently one time. Very, very simple, actually. He said, we always think mercy for me and justice for them. That's like our mentality. We want to be understood whenever we make mistakes, and we want people to understand our intentions and our errors, and then we want to be really, really, really quick to condemn and judge others whenever they either do the same thing or they do something to, like, not even the worst, like not even to the extent that we do it. So I think we got to be just careful of that. It's like a blind spot in our minds, and it's a blind spot in our souls that we naturally can really overlook the kind of stuff that we got going on in our life. And I think Jesus said it so eloquently when he talked about removing the speck of dirt inside of your eye before you try to, a log out of your own eye, before you try to remove some little speck that's in another person's eye. And in Buddhism, they have a very similar idea of this. It's almost the same exact thing, which kind of tells you some of these truths run, it's just common in humanity that we deal with these kind of things. That the saying says that, don't worry about the snow on your neighbor's roof, worry about the snow that's outside of your door, on your doorstep. So it's the same exact concept. And that could just be, take that as you will. But I think we're all flawed. I'll be the absolute first to admit it right off the top. I'm a sinner in need of grace daily. And I say these things because I have concern about the Christian church, the way that I've seen the direction of people going lately. And I think it's very important that we address this, because I've seen what I've seen. And very clearly is that people are sacrificing kingdom goals for the sake of winning elections and for the sake of, passing laws or whatever, as if that's going to be like an actual spiritual victory that we need. We need to have a waking up, revolution of our hearts and our minds. But that is not going to start by donating or texting something to a phone number, or hashtagging anything, or reposting something on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever. It's going to start when Christians, first and foremost, stop looking at other people and saying, we need to start first and foremost. We need to clean house inside first, and we need to come clean of our sins and our immoralities that are going on. And that is absolutely me first. There's no room for me to start off with going after people wanting to attack other people without saying, man, Isaiah, still has a lot of growing up, a lot of maturing, and a lot of sin and washing of my hands that I need. So just get that out there right now, And I do want to say one other thing before I get into kind of like the meat of what I want to discuss today. But if you look at 1 Corinthians 4:5, it talks about not judging things before the appointed time. And yes, or, referring to people, like, there's this problem we always say, like in Christians, like you shouldn't judge. Well, the truth is that we're definitely called to judge actions and judge certain kinds of behavior. And there comes a point in the Bible where it talks about multiple times about expelling someone if they're just not willing to change, and you've gone through the proper routes to try to bring them back, which we should be doing. But at some point it's like, okay, if this is the way you want to live, at some point there is this, I think it does more damage to keep people around and just saying, we're going to let you keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, and without there being any kind of accountability. So that's not my opinion. These are the opinions, from the Bible. And you could see the way that Paul deals with certain people If you read his epistles, you could definitely see that there's points in which he's dealing with people directly. One of them, just really quick, is Peter. But if you read like Corinthians, you'll see that he definitely has issues with people. And he talks in other epistles that like, hey, I'm going to deal with this situation because this situation is not going in the right direction. And this person's doing X, Y, and Z. And it's time to deal with it and address it. So I do want to say that, you know, we don't know where people are going to end off in their life. I mean, if you would have looked at me 10 years ago, I was nothing even relatively close to a believer. And somehow God got his hands upon me. And I know guys right now who would just blow your mind to know that where this person came from, being a drug dealer, a drug user, and now they're going into prisons and helping people with substance abuse issues. I know guys with the same exact situation who are now pastors, and it gives me chills to just think about the kind of transformation that God can do in people's lives, you know. So we want to definitely not want to be pushing people away from the light, but calling them into the light, but also using the light to shine into darkness, because there is a lot of darkness out there. And we need to try to be building Christianity that's based according to the Bible. And it's not based on something as ridiculous as like a country, you know, nationalism, or a political party, or a race, ethnicity. These are all things that are very different, even denominations and such. These are things that have been created by humans, with exception to the race. But these are man-made things, and so the gospel that's spoken about in the Bible is very different from what you see today. And so a lot of that has just been people taking in their own opinions, their own thoughts. Whenever I was in Bible college, we used to say, "Hey, man, you're reading from the book of imaginations, or you're reading from the book of second opinions." Because this stuff is just stuff that just comes into people's minds, and then they want to label it like a scripture, and it's nothing even close to that is in the Bible. So I will talk a little bit more about that, but I do want to say something that one thing that's really dangerous on both sides of the aisle. This is very, very, very clear. Everything I'm saying here is not aimed at any one group of people or party, party lines. This kind of blindness affects people from both sides. It affects people from every country, every age, every gender, ethnicity. It's these are humanitarian issues that we're dealing with. So when I talk about extremism, and when I talk about dismissing the stuff that your side does, that goes across the board. Both sides are doing this, okay? Both sides are letting stuff go that they shouldn't, and both sides are making special rules for the people who have the same D or R next to their name as themselves. Like, you either have to have the same standard across the board, or just don't be opening up your mouths about this kind of stuff, because this looks really bad, especially to a world that's unbelieving. You know, when you want to take Christianity and you're saying, I'm going to wield this thing as like an axe or a knife or a sword. Okay, that's fine. I can understand that prerogative and that desire, and I can respect that to a huge degree. The problem is, though, please pay attention to this. The problem is whenever you selectively use that, that is the major issue. And I think that's what a lot of unbelievers find really, really hard to swallow. Okay. Because I've been doing this podcast now for about 4 years with atheists. And I got to tell you something, Christians, you guys are not fooling anyone as far as these issues go, as far as other people who aren't even Christians. So they see this level of hypocrisy. they see this level of selective outrage and judgmentalness, and it just makes the gospel look completely unbelievable. So I think, yeah, just we got to be fair, and we have to definitely say that, look, one, neither of these sides have everything figured out. Two, we all lack moral intuition in some way or another. You know, we all have some mixed up priorities, and we're all various stages of growing and learning. And so we just have to start off with a bit of humility that says that, look, I mean, when we're on this journey with Christ, there's going to be plenty of mistakes, and there's going to be plenty of times where we're growing and what we're learning. And sometimes as Christians, we need to go through something which is called it's called a refinery, where we get refined, we're made stronger, we're made pure. But this kind of thing doesn't happen overnight. And so even if we have arrived to a better place than other people, we definitely have to understand, one, lots of people don't know God. Two, lots of people do know God, but they're on their own individual path. And Paul talks about this, and I know it's a different context that he says this, because what he says is he's talking about who cut in on you while you're running your race. He was specifically talking about people trying to make them follow certain kinds of laws or rituals. But I'm using it in a slightly different context and saying that, like, who's cutting in on your race whenever you, like, why would you cut in on someone else's race to say, as they're there and they're trying to, live out their gospel, and live out the gospel in their lives, why would you come in to condemn and to try to hamper their journey? It's totally fine to address stuff and to try to, correct them, check out their blind spots, because when you're running, you can't see your back. I guess you can never really see your back unless you're looking at a mirror or something, but we all have blind spots and we all have weaknesses that we need help with. And this is what we really should be doing. But to do so in such a blatant way that's become politicized, I think is so off. And finally, we get it to what I want to talk about, which is Trump. And I do have to say this. I would argue by analogy real quick, but so there's like these porcupines and other animals like honey badgers, and you see them like in Africa, and you'll see some of these lions trying to mess with them, right? And so with the porcupine, they'll get like these, I think they're called shills or whatever. They'll get stuck with their long pointy hairs. And with the honey badger, just their anatomy makes it extremely difficult for a larger animal to kill and to eat. It sometimes does happen, but if you look at a honey badger or a porcupine being attacked by another animal, it is extremely difficult for them to kill them if they can. If they do, they're going to suffer a lot of damage. And when you see sometimes the lions, they'll be like, this is just simply not worth my time. It is not worth the struggle to do what it's going to have to do to eat this meal. I'm better off to go somewhere else. And so that's why when you see them, the ones that you see who are much more willing to mess around and find out, as they say, are like the younger cubs. The older animals they've already gone through this. They're like, this is just, I got these scars to prove why I shouldn't do this. And in the same way, like, I remember times, God, whenever I was in college and I was just talking a mean game, like, oh yeah, I could do this, I could do that. And, I remember one time I just thought I was the greatest wrestler, ever. And I got into a couple, I was just running my mouth, and I got put in line by a couple of guys who got me down pretty good. And afterwards I was like, man, I really should keep my mouth shut. Trying to brag about stuff that certainly didn't happen once or twice, or maybe even a couple of dozen times. But point is that as you're getting older, you should definitely have said, I've made this mistake before. I've gone down this route, and this is not something I should be doing before. Again, sorry. So I do want to talk about Trump because this is honest to God. I mean, I'm telling you, is I could look up to heaven right now and take an oath before God, and because I'm sure there's been times that I've seen somebody do this to a worse extent than Trump. I'm sure there is, and I'm sure there's been other people. I'll be very clear about that. I'm not going to say he's the only person I've ever seen to do this, because I'm sure there are. But I'm telling you, clear as day right now, as clear-minded as I am right now, I have never seen somebody who has got interviewed and then like 30 to 40 years later is actually like more proud and arrogant and crazy minded, to just spouting whatever they want to spout. Normally you see this same thing happen with people who are in their early 20s and in their early 30s, and then age has a way to ground us all. That's just a reality. I think of some people right off the top of my head, like Brian Bosworth. He was this guy who played football back in the NFL, and he was like this crazy wild, like he had all these weird, hair and earrings, and he decided it was the greatest thing on earth. And then he got into the NFL, and he didn't do so well. I think he made a few movies, but then later on he became like an evangelist, and I've seen him talk about his days as he was. I mean, the guy was like a hothead. He thought he was tough shit, and then the league humbled him. And I do want to talk about one other thing that I've seen recently, which is Tank Abbott, which is a former UFC fighter, and this guy was like in his prime. He was like, I mean, most of his fights would end within a single minute, and most of them wouldn't even make it into the second round because, I mean, he was always swinging for this fence. He was knocking people out in like 30 seconds or like a minute. I mean, most of his fights just went out there, he punched him a few times, knocked him out. And this guy was proud and arrogant. And there was this time where he knocked this guy out. His name is John Matua. And you could see John Matua's head like bouncing off the canvas, and he suffers a concussion. And he sometimes when we see people get concussions, their arms like freeze up like this. Well, he stands up and he's making fun of him like that. And then this guy, like, I don't know, he's probably in his 60s right now, but he had to have surgery and he almost died. And it really just wound up changing the kind of person he was. And it's very touching actually to see him talk now, because he's so much more of a compassionate person, and he's someone who really wants to see people, succeed and get up, whereas before he was just wanted to put people down. So those two cases I've seen recently, and I have to tell you, like, it has been the exact opposite what I've seen happening with Trump. If you look at the earlier interviews that he did 40 years ago, he's very calm, very collective, doesn't raise his voice. It's quite remarkable. It's literally something you would expect the exact opposite to be. You would expect someone to have gone through, life experiences that would have just centered them or brought them down to earth a little bit, grounded them. And if you notice something with kids, like whenever you start to let them get away with something, they'll just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And then the problem never gets better. It always gets worse. And this is especially true if you see kids who are like very, very spoiled, and they just feel like a sense of entitlement whenever they start to grow up. I know this, I'm telling you flat out, that's literally one of the biggest problems I had to unlearn as an adult, was being spoiled and understanding that things can't always go my way. So something ridiculous. I tell you how long it took me to deal with that issue. It really is embarrassing. But I'm saying this because this is not a judge, like a condemnation or judgment, being judging this person or anyone else. But this is really what's happened. Like as Christians, there should have been a lot of people to stop, take a step back, and say, "Dude, this is not like Christian. Like this is unbecoming of someone who's professing the name of Christ. It leaves a really bad taste in people's mouth. And to be honest, as Christians, we got to know that this is like fuel for the fire for a lot of atheists. They see this and they're like, there's just no way that this God that you're alleging to believe in is alive and these people are following him, because you have someone who it just gets worse. It does not get any better. And there were so many times during the first candidacy where I was positive it would have brought an end to, the candidacy, but the rhetoric just kept getting turned up, the personal attacks. And I do have to talk about this for a second because, man, I have to say this. We used to do this a lot when I was in junior high. Okay. I don't know why it wasn't so much in sixth grade. I'm sure we did it a little bit, but in junior high, I think it might have been because of developmental level. But junior high was the point in which this hit like a fever pitch. We would take people's names, usually their last names, and we would like flip around a syllable, and try to make some kind of pun out of people's names. I mean, extremely, extremely, extremely childish stuff. Stuff that, like, yeah, it's embarrassing. But I can tell you clear as day that those kind of things, I shouldn't say completely stop, but I don't remember any of that stuff going on after you got to high school. It's kind of one of those things that, like, you should learn to outgrow this. This is something that's like literally childish. It's not something that you would expect for people who are maturing and who are growing into, as you're in high school, you're getting ready to mature into adulthood. So the kind of stuff that I've seen taking place, talking about, size of certain extremities on the body, this kind of stuff is like, I just watching some of this go down, and like, when are Christians going to say this is enough? Like, you've insulted entire groups of people. And I think one of the only Christians I ever saw was Jenison Franklin, who talked about whatever he said about Haiti. He called Haiti a shithole country. And Jenison Franklin was calling it out. And even so, I mean, praise God he did it. But even so, he was like, I just want to say that, like, with the utmost respect, like, he was going on. He had this, I'm trying to mimic a Georgian accent. He's from Georgia. But, he did say that these people are creating God's image. And if that is true, if it is, positively that you believe that this is a shithole country, that's all the more reason to want to try to help these people to escape what's going on there, man. I mean, I've been to Haiti and I wrote a book about it, and I've seen it firsthand, some of the trauma that some of these people are living through. And so to try to use that as a way to say that we shouldn't allow them to come here, I mean, it's the irony is like you could cut it with a jackhammer. So, I mean, there's been so much of this that's going on, and just the continual ramping up of rhetoric. I think just Christians, we've just done a, poorly bad job of gatekeeping some of the stuff that's happened. And it's not a good thing. Being a Christian has to come before any election, before any party, before your race, before your economic class, before your denomination, or any other kind of isms or that we have out there. This has to be the priority. And I do want to say, though, as someone, this is not really related to specific. Well, it is related to him, but I do have to say that, like, as someone who lives in South Korea, I did at least appreciate the fact that he was trying to meet with Kim Jong-un. I think anybody who had any kind of 2 cents of common sense would have known that that situation had no chance of success. But do have to say that as the parent of a Korean child who's not able to visit the ancestral homeland of her, her people here, all the history of North Korea, I do have to say I at least appreciated the effort that he was putting into that to try to make peace there with North Korea. I think anyone who really knew the situation would have known that that was just political theater for Kim Jong Un. It was giving him a sense of legitimacy in the world, but there was no chance. Like, they're just people you cannot have real conversations with and try to make progress with. People like, Mussolini, Hitler. There's really, you could meet with them all day you want. You could meet with them for 24 hours straight, but any kind of promises they're making you is going to be done with the express intent of trying to get something from you or try to use it or hurt you in the long run. So that's just a really unfortunate reality about the world we live in. But I do have to say that if you look at what he was doing with Israel, I mean, most people would have thought that that wasn't even humanly possible. Some of the stuff that was happening with the better relations with Saudi Arabia, and I mean, there was going in the right direction. And I do have to say that there was relative peace under Trump. If you take a look at what's happening in the world, there's always dozens of conflicts going on simultaneously, and there's also dozens of other places where you have separatist movements that would like to carve out, their own little part of a country, and that those places always have potential to spill into some kind of violence. So it was relatively better, but I mean, if you've seen what's happened under Biden, I'm not sure if that's just pure chance or just because he's been perceived as being a weak leader. But if you look at the situation with, Afghanistan and with Israel, that kind of stuff simply was not happening under a Trump presidency. So in that only sense of the word, like as an American who lives in South Korea, I would have to lean towards Trump for that specific reasons. Part of the other part is because, a lot of other policies there aren't going to even apply to me or my family. So it's not really relevant. Of course, I have family who live back there, but I don't know. I don't, as far as voting either side, I think either side, they're filled with weasels. So, I think I've heard it said pretty eloquently, like they talk about maybe choosing the less of two evils. But for me, kind of like my opinion on that is like, if evil's going to succeed, well, you're going to have to do so without my help. I'm not going to participate in a system that is corrupt and influenced by money and other parties that aren't just ordinary average people. Whenever you're talking about people who are working for the interest of corporations, or I don't know, or I really don't want to get into all that, who's exactly behind politics. But I think what really it is there's a lot of political theater that takes place. And that's fine. I mean, I do have to say some of it's entertaining. And even the whole bragging about the size of his Johnson, I mean, if you're watching that on TV, that is, I mean, it's at least more entertaining than some of the ways some of these other debates have gone, where it's really dry and, there's not much personality. So Trump definitely did add an element of entertainment to something that I don't know if that's something with politics and people disagreeing and grandstanding and, I don't know if that's entertaining to you, that it's real life drama that plays out. I get that, but the end of the day, there's a lot of hurting people in the world, and there's some talk about how much Trump raised specifically after he was indicted and I guess charged and found guilty, and then how much Kamala Harris raised in a single day. And I just take a step back. It makes my head hurt to think about how many lives Christians could be saving, helping out by using that money for something else. I think there's a lot of political consultants who are having very fat pockets based off of their little, as they always talk about on there, just chipping $5, just chipping $10. Well, I think there's politicians, there's vendors, people who print their political ads. They make a lot of money, man. There's a lot of money that's being made in there. And so why people want to fund that machine, it is genuinely just beyond me. I mean, I think the more that we do that as Christians, we're relegating responsibility for doing the stuff that we should be doing as Christians. And so for me, that's the most troubling element of it. And also just the rhetoric, the way in which people now are willing to not break bread with their family, to cut ties. I can just tell you this, the closest relative I have on the planet, apart from my daughter, has basically cut ties with me over this situation because he's insisted that I support Donald Trump, even though I've made it abundantly, explicitly clear I don't support parties on either side. I believe they're both part of a corrupt system, and I would much rather give my attention and my time to things that I know that I can make a strong impact on, because both sides, they'll talk about X, Y, and Z and all this stuff that's going on, but well, what exactly do you expect me to do about it? You think me giving you my one vote, my one single solitary vote, that's going to make any kind of difference in the grand scheme of things? And if you want to feel important, okay, if you want to feel important and you want to feel like you're playing some kind of role in this, and that's exciting, this political theater, all right, man, I'm not going to tell anyone one way how to live their life, do with their money. I can tell you this as a Christian. When I was in college, I may have given $20 to a political candidate. I may have, because I don't want to say I've never done it, but I can tell you that certainly within the last 20 years, I haven't given not even 10 cents. But I will tell you what I have done. I have helped people who are escaping the war from Russians who are escaping the war to avoid getting drafted. I have helped out, and I'm helping out orphans and overseas, and I have done a lot of things like that. But I mean, I would much rather an orphan getting $10 or being able to provide a few meals and a few nights of sleep for someone who's running for their life. I would much rather do that with my time and energy. So I don't know. I do want to say that this rhetoric has got to stop from both sides. I mean, it's at a fever pitch now. And whenever it's at to the point where people are starting to get physically assaulted, something's got to change. As Christians, we have to lead. We have to be the first ones to take a step up and saying, we got to do a better job at this. When COVID was going on and Christians were complaining about having to wear masks or follow rules, I said, look, man, as Christians, we got to be the first people who step up to say we're willing to inconvenience ourselves if it means helping someone else, even potentially. There's a lot of talk about the effectiveness of the mask, but I live in South Korea, and what you see here more often than not is that people wear masks a lot, actually, well before COVID hit. I mean, that's one of the things. You'll find masks at every store around here. They have masks, and the way that they normally wear those masks is whenever they get sick. It's not because they're trying to avoid getting sick. It's they wear the mask when they get sick to keep other people from getting sick. So the mentality that they have in Asia, I'd say it's something that more collectively and it's something that I think Christians and Americans specifically could learn from, is their collectivist mentality. I think really we could benefit from it, because there is a lot of individualism in America, and there's a lot of people who are thinking about themselves more than the bigger picture of, specifically with the country, if you want to just take a purely secular approach, but also just as far as Christianity, we talk about individual rights, but as far as the government goes, but we also have these individual rights as far as, as being a Christian. Do I want to exercise doing X, Y, and Z when I know it has the potential to hurt these people? And I know it has the potential to turn off a whole groups of people from Jesus Christ. And to me, that is absolutely disturbing that this would be done for the sake of anyone, any person. Trump out of the equation for a second, Kamala out the equation for a second, Biden, Clinton. Helping out politicians for the sake of breaking bread or breaking ties, cutting off ties with your own family and friends. I don't know. I'm not going to do it. If that's something you want to do, great, all part of you. But just leave God out of the equation. Just be honest about it. Say what you want to do, and say this is your own personal opinion. That's fine. Everyone's given a God-given right to have freedom of thought and freedom of action. But you can't say, I'm going to do this because I feel like God wants me to do this. Especially when this stuff is just so outrageously against the Bible. We're called to pray for our leaders, not just America, but all over the world. So let's start first and foremost with that. Second of all is just policing bad behavior, man. And it doesn't matter what side your party is on. I do want to talk about one thing. I've seen Christians going really hard after Kamala Harris. And then, okay, if you're going to talk about her past as far as dating or whatever, okay, but are you really going to avoid everything that we probably could have said about Trump in that area? Because I think, objectively speaking, the stuff that we know is specifically about Trump is far worse. It's far worse than any of the accusations leveled at Kamala. So it's hey, that last thought, I do have to say this is, I heard this great quote that says, trying to bring up my past is like trying to rob my old house. I don't live there anymore. So we can take that and say, hey, look, going after people's past, stuff that they've done in the past, I mean, what good does that do? We're talking about people who've made mistakes 10, 20 years ago. And especially when they've made steps to improve their life. There's just no room for that as Christians, but just in general as humans. If someone is legitimately trying to improve their life and trying to change their behavior, that's commendable, that's honorable, but not changing who you are, that's what I'm living with. Continually doing it over and over and getting away with it and not calling out the continual action, not stuff that was done 20 years ago, not stuff that was done in people's youth whenever everyone is making idiotic decisions. So just think about that. Try to be even-handed with the condemnation or judgment that you want to. If you're going to do it across the board. But better yet, don't do it, and try to take a minute to try to understand people's individual hurts and struggles, and definitely take the time to pray for everyone, because whether they're your political opponent or enemy, as you might see it, we're all humans having this sentient experience on this planet, and no one asked to be born in the circumstances that they were born into. And we do not know. Our end off 1 Corinthians 4:5. about judging things before the appointed time. We do not know where people are going to end off. And so have some patience, have some compassion. That includes towards Trump, towards Kamala, towards Republicans, towards Democrats, towards Muslims, gays, Jews, trans, bi, tri, whatever sexuality they might come up with next week. Just have some compassion, no matter the gender, no matter the race. Don't let politics compromise your humanity. Last thought. Don't let your politics compromise being a decent human being.